Okay, wonderful. And now we enter into the third talk in this series by André Mercanzini. And he is a healthcare entrepreneur passionate about improving lives through innovation of new medical technologies. And he is the founder of Angel Wave Medical, developing non-invasive brain stimulation therapies using focused ultrasound. He's also the founder of Air Curve Medical, developing automated anesthetic ventilation methods.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Voilà. Okay. Merci. This talk will touch many of the subjects that Professor Dennison and Dr. Ducret have teed up for me quite nicely. So I think you're all experts by now, so I hope you still have a couple of topics to learn here. I have nothing but conflicts of interest, so I will just say that right now. I was the principal founder of Aleva Neurotherapeutics. I was a co-founder in Adept Neuro, which we'll talk about, and Angel Wave Medical, and I'm on the advisory board of the V Center in Geneva. This slide is very similar to Tim's in that I would like to motivate the discussion of entrepreneurship in neurotechnology, the ability to raise funding and develop new products in this field to the massive global healthcare burden and the cost of these diseases. So Scientific American has an article called The $10 Trillion Disease, which is Alzheimer's and dementia. The Economist just 4 years ago calculated that the neurological disorders in Europe is surpassed 1 trillion. And that is actually equivalent to the cost of heart disease, cancer, and diabetes combined. So we tend to think of cancer or even diabetes or cardiovascular disease as the most burdensome. But when you group the mental health disorders with the neurodegenerative disorders and you create the category of neurological disorders, you surpass 1 trillion in Europe alone. And in the US, they surpass easily 1 trillion just with psychiatric illnesses. And they get to 1.5 trillion in healthcare expenditure from the top 3 diseases, so psychiatric, neurodegenerative, and autism-related disorders. We tend to think of the US and their healthcare spending as being only private, but actually in the United States, they have one of the largest percentages of GDP dedicated to healthcare expenditure, even though it's mostly a private system. We also tend to think that the US military takes a big chunk of the GDP, but actually the numbers are very different for the past 10 years. So the percentage of GDP spent in the US on healthcare is 17% versus military, which is 3.5. So you're talking of a ratio that's almost 5-to-1 healthcare to military expenditure. And this motivates what I think is the dawn of an era of brain therapies in order to tackle these massive expenses. And the billionaires of the world are actually taking positions there scientifically and entrepreneurially. So we all, or maybe some of you have been following the news from Neuralink and the massive amount of resources that Elon Musk has committed to solving these problems. One of the founders of Microsoft, Paul Allen, who passed away about 5 or 6 years ago, created the Allen Institute for Brain Science and left a very large endowment to that. Caltech has a $1 billion endowment for neuroscience. And the neighborhood where Professor Lacour and I are from, in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, has Hans-Jörg Wyss, who was one of the principal shareholders of Synthes, created the V Center in Geneva, dedicated to developing therapies in neurological and mental health disorders. So I would like to tell you a tale of 3 neurotech startups that I started. I have created companies outside of neurotechnology, but I have to say that this is where my passion lies. And the first one I will be talking about is about deep brain stimulation. That will be Aleva. And then I'll follow on to a subject that Professor Dennison touched, which was SEEG recordings in drug-resistant epilepsy. and then I'll close out with a new company that we've created called Angel Wave. So Dr. Decré showed a beautiful slide about the funding pathway for startup companies. And it is actually the exact pathway that we followed at Aleva. We've raised over 75 million Swiss francs. We're pretty close to 75 million euros since we were founded in 2008. And we have taken this innovation and this product to market. It is a very, very difficult path. So I fully agree with Dr. Decré that it's not for short distance runners. And after now 16 years since foundation, it's not for marathon runners either. There's some ultra marathon or something that I'm still running with this company. So this is born of a collaboration which is very special at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. I was a PhD student studying medical engineering under Professor Renaud, who's my mentor and who is the founder of 15 startup companies from his laboratory at EPFL. And I sat down in a cafeteria once at EPFL with a neurosurgeon named Professor Claudio Polo, who, number one, we became instant friends for life. We're both cyclists and we're both very passionate about this field. So when we get frustrated, we go for a bicycle ride and everything gets better. But most importantly, what I want to say is that I do believe that engineers are technology pushers, and I do believe that we are in our corner making our thing, and we're very obsessed with it. That's absolutely true. And I do believe that the docs are out there, the doctors are out there with these clinical needs, and they are asking and they're trying to interact with us as engineers to understand what it is that they can pull from us. If you can establish that relationship where you have a pusher and a puller, it is a very smooth operation. And that's what happened between myself and Professor Polo, obviously highly mentored by Philippe Renaud, who taught me that process. So we've seen a couple of these slides already from Dr. Decré and Professor Dennison, and you now know that deep brain stimulation involves a pacemaker that has a stimulation signal that is going up through the neck. Professor Dennison spoke about some of the clinical needs around designing these specifically for children. And there are leads that are implanted deep in the brain, and these signals carry to the brain in the indications that we've spoken about, but also extend now to psychiatric indications, past Parkinson's and epilepsy as well. So deep brain stimulation is really the convergence between a neuromodulation market and a highly economically burdensome indication of Parkinson's disease and essential tremor, but also is applicable to other neurological disorders. So I will play a video now, which I hope the sound will work, of my co-founder, because I want him to state the clinical need. The clinical need should not come from myself, the engineer.
Deep brain stimulation is one of the most challenging surgeries to treat brain disorders such as Parkinson's disease, tremor, or even major depression. The therapy consists in delivering electrical current through electrodes implanted inside the brain. The surgery requires a very high precision. Even an error of 1 millimeter can drastically decrease the clinical benefit of the therapy. For this reason, we operate the patients awake in order to refine the optimal positioning of the electrode. Despite precise electrode implantation, up to 30% of implanted patients suffer from stimulation-induced side effects. This is due to the surrounding environment of the subthalamic nucleus, which is very rich in fibers. And when they are stimulated, these fibers create side effects. This is the major limitation of the existing electrodes. They provide too large a volume of tissue stimulated around the electrodes. What we need as surgeons is a more precise deep brain stimulation.
So importantly, when the phrase, what we need as surgeons, that's when the medical engineers should be quiet, put away their toys, and listen. That is the most important moment. And I want you to understand this as we go through the other companies as well, that it starts with a clinical need. It starts with an engineer that has access to new technologies. We're going to show how these technologies can be, can motivate new solutions. But that sentence is what starts the spark, I believe, of a medical device startup company. Here is, again, you've seen a couple of these videos, and we're going to see a couple more in the next few minutes, the state of the patient. This patient underwent deep brain stimulation surgery, and so this is their hospital stay before their surgery, and they are medication off. So what exactly are we accessing as in deep brain stimulation surgery in the leads? And so here you've seen a couple of these images. I'll just invite you to look at the subthalamic nucleus, which is what we were targeting in our study. It's about the size of an almond, and then the electrode is a number you're going to hear a couple of times from me, 1.3 millimeters in diameter. And there are structures around the subthalamic nucleus which would cause side effects. And so you really want to optimize the volume that you are stimulating, as precisely like Claudio Polo said. And so at the time that Dr. De Cree was also working on Sapiens within the Philips structure, we were at EPFL working probably with significantly less resources and less discipline. So you're not going to see us pushing the technology envelope, but we were looking for a way to stimulate this very small region of the subthalamic nucleus. And at the time, the theory was, and this is an image very similar to what you just saw in the Sapiens presentation, they were stimulating in these large rings, and so the theory was that the electric field was actually reaching and evoking these side effects and decreasing the efficacy of this therapy, or creating side effects for the patient, which would require them to decrease the amount of current that was being transmitted to their brain, and therefore they wouldn't have an arrest of their tremor or a release of their rigidity, which are the major symptoms of their disease. So the theory was that if we could concentrate, as you saw also in the Sapiens presentation, if we could concentrate the electric field into only one region, we would be able to eliminate these side effects. And perhaps, Dr. Cree, you agree, we didn't know if this was going to work back then. We had no idea. We knew that we could make the device, but I think on your side, clinically, no one knew whether this was going to work, and there were tons of people telling us it was not going to work. I would say now that this is a standard of care, so very rarely, at least in the Western world, are you going to have electrodes that are not directional nowadays. So it goes to show you, I think 2012, December 2012, so 12-12-12 was our first patient that we tested acutely, and we saw the directional effect immediately, and that was really the first moment where we realized that this was going to work. So fast forward through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and back-to-back marathons, I would say. The system that reached the market was CE marked in 2020. It was approved for an FDA IDE 2 years later. It was reimbursed in Germany, so by the time we were running the study, the patients were, we would say, commercial patients. And the basis of this technology is called MEMS, so micro electromechanical systems, and it was the first MEMS device to be implanted and approved for sale at the time. Now, with Neuralink, they also use MEMS technology, and so Neuralink is also implanting MEMS in the brain in a different form, obviously, but it's the same underlying microtechnology device. So the patient has this rechargeable device that's implanted in the chest. It has this extension cable attached to it, and then the electrode, which you're going to see in higher magnification in a second, is attached there. Most patients receive two, so one on each side, as we saw before. Professor Dennison did speak to a clinical need which we addressed, which is called the rechargeability of the device. So it's very scary for the battery to run out and to have another surgery after 3 or 4 years to replace the stimulator, which could increase the chances of infection. And so we had a rechargeable device. The patient takes home this little programmer with them that allows them to increase the current in certain social contexts. And Professor Dennison explained it beautifully that obviously there's a stigma to their rigidity or their tremor, and they can adjust this current as they move on through their life. This little paddle here recharges the device. So about once a week, they'll put this paddle on their chest over the implant, and in about 90 minutes to 120 minutes, it's fully recharged, and it's good to go for another week. And then on this side, the physician, they have a programmer which is about the size of an iPad, and they can use that programmer to speak to the patient's implant and adjust the parameters, which is a very laborious process that still contains quite a few clinical needs. And so I'm going to show you now a framework to think about how we, on the startup side and on the entrepreneurial side, think about the design space of these devices. So here you see magnification of the electrode. As you know, the company was founded in Switzerland, and so they really love microtechnology over there. That was the basis also of the laboratory where I was in. They're also very good at watchmaking, you may have heard, and so there's some very intricate assembly procedures that are being performed here in the Watch Valley in Switzerland. So these are being assembled by watchmakers who have either changed their career path into medical devices and other precision devices. So again, this diameter is 1.3 millimeters, and you can see there are 8 electrodes that you can see, and then there's another 4 electrodes going into the screen. So there's 12 electrodes in total. And another big question I would say in the times of 2012 to 2014, between Aleva and Sapiens was really how many electrodes did you need? No one really knew. We didn't know if 2 was enough or 3 was enough, or Sapiens had 40, we had 12. We just didn't know. So what I would like to introduce here, and this is how I try to help young engineers and students understand design space, so that they're not pushing technology, but that they're listening to the clinical needs. And so there's no dimensions here. It's just I'm trying to align design parameters that are working against each other, okay? And so when Professor Dennison was at Medtronic, they would have had a very, very sophisticated way to do this that would end up in thousands of pages, and so did we at Aleva, but I'm trying very hard to simplify this down and show you that, for example, we had 24 channels in our stimulator to power one electrode of 12 and the other electrode of 12. So that's 24 in total. Dr. Cray's company had 40 in total on the one electrode, and then they had ways to what's called multiplex these signals and send these signals in. Now, if you have too few, you look like the old product, which is just 4 channels, right? So I put that kind of in the red zone, right? And then if you have more, well, there's a point where we didn't know at the time, and there's a point where you don't need that much. You don't really know where that is. So your instinct as an engineer is just to design as many channels as possible, and you don't know where to stop. But then another problem comes up, and they say, well, if you have too many stimulator channels, your stimulator is going to get very large. So we want it to be small. Professor Dennison laid out a very important clinical need. Can we design something specifically adapted to children as well? So you want it to be small, but you want it to have lots of channels. So these are kind of working against each other. And there's a sweet spot between the two. And that's what we are looking for. And that's what I would call either the design requirement or the design sweet spot. So then you can introduce, you can have thousands of these, by the way, but I'm trying to just show you some around deep brain stimulation. So you have the electrode size, but maybe the smaller it gets, you're going to have, and the more electrodes you have, your lead diameter is going to increase, right? So these are working against each other. So these are kind of opposing forces. Dr. Cray spoke about graphene and its implications on impedance, and so that's an important part of the design space. They need to be able to see these on X-rays and CT scans, as you saw in one of the images. They have to go into the MRI because the patient might need an MRI for another disease. So the conditionality of the MRI is very important. And if it's not MRI conditional, then it's a bad design. But you become less MRI conditional the more electrodes you have, for example, right? So these are all kind of working against each other. So what I would like to propose here is that once you've lined up as many of the green spaces as possible, you get a design sweet spot, okay? So in a sophisticated place like Medtronic or at Philips, that would be called the design requirement. But here I am kind of showing you the design space, how it leads to the design sweet spot. I'm going to bring this up again 3 times, so once for each company, because I think this is the antidote to getting out of the trap of the engineer pushing technology and not listening to the clinician's needs. So I'm going to show you very proudly a patient who was implanted almost to the day 3 years ago. So this patient was implanted 3 years ago. I'm not cherry-picking the best patient in the study. This is the first patient that was implanted with our device. Alex McKellis is the CTO of Aleva. He was the first employee of the company. Okay, so the first employee of the company hired about, I would say, 11 years before this moment. His whole career as building up as an engineer all the way to CTO of Aleva was for this moment to have the honor of switching on the first patient. So here he's switched off, and you can see he's Parkinson. He's a right arm tremor, and there's a tremor also in the foot. He was having severe side effects from taking levodopa, and as you can see, he's quite young. So he was diagnosed in his early 40s, and he's in his late 40s at the time of surgery when he decides that he wants to stop taking levodopa and try deep brain stimulation. And so this is the moment where he gets switched on for the first time. And so you can see there are different positions of the hand that the neurologist is looking at. He starts to laugh. I mean, the whole room, I'm behind the camera crying at this moment, I have to admit. So everybody was quite impressed by this effect. Now, what I want to underline here is that we had just turned it on, so we hadn't even started increasing the amplitude. So the effect is immediate. It's absolutely immediate. And you can see the difference there. So that's one patient, the first patient, so not cherry-picked, but a very, very, very good result. And so I want to show you what this looks like when you expand to other patients. So the study has recruited 23 patients, and the first 16 are presented in this data. So this is a rating scale, which takes several measures of the patient taken by the neurologist to determine how they're doing with their stimulation on and their medication on. And so over 6 months, we saw a 31% decrease in this rating scale, which is our primary endpoint for the study. We compared it to publications in the past, and you can kind of see, an upwards trajectory of the results in the literature. But certainly, I think we're in a good neighborhood in that we're keeping the pressure on the field to make sure that steps are being made to increase the efficacy of these therapies. And so this modality of directionality is certainly something that gets us to a new level of standard of care. Very importantly to the patients for several reasons is the decrease in the levodopa that they're taking every day. And this is also a significant step in the literature as well. So we saw at the 6-month follow-up almost a 60% decrease in the equivalent levodopa that the patients were taking every day. So the side effects that they suffer from this medication were significantly decreased, and they can again benefit from a better quality of life. And in the publication domain, again, the directionality seems to, very, very small numbers compared to some of these studies, but seems to be in the right neighborhood of continuing to increase the efficacy of this therapy. So here you can see the electrode in a little bit more detail. There are several features here that you see some radio opacity markers. You see the 3 electrodes, the 3 directions around the circumference, and then you can see all 12 electrodes. You can see some other micro system features that are on the surface. Okay, so that's deep brain stimulation. I'm going to pass on to stereoencephalogram, so SEEGs, which we touched on with Professor Dennison's talk. And so we've already seen the needs around drug-resistant epilepsy and determining where these epileptic foci are, either for determining a therapy or determining a surgical intervention. And so you saw the electrodes on the surface of the skull where they're trying to determine where the epileptic focus is in the deep brain. And it's also been pioneered to go deeper into the brain to see if you can get as close as possible to these epileptic foci in these patients. And again, this is in large part a pediatric indication, so you see images of children obviously here. And what is happening here compared to deep brain stimulation, instead of one electrode on each side of the brain permanently, these patients will, in the hospitals that we worked in, will generally have these electrodes implanted for 2 weeks, okay, 2 weeks. And they are ambulating around the hospital. So quite often they stay at the hospital at the epilepsy monitoring unit for the 2 weeks. And these electrodes are continuously recording, or recording most of the time, in order to capture a seizure, okay? And so what happens when you capture a seizure, so you can see all the electrodes have implanted that way, and when you capture a seizure with these kinds of signals that Professor Dennison showed before, you can determine where the epileptic focus is, and then you can determine whether it's safe to ablate, i.e. burn, or thermocoagulate this volume of tissue, which is a very, very risky procedure. So you have to be absolutely certain you're in the right region. So again, listening to the clinical needs of several neurosurgeons that were working specifically in epilepsy, we formed Adept Neuro, and I'm going to show you the design space now. So this is what the electrode looks like. It's similar technology to what you saw before. There are 15 contacts, so you can see in the existing devices there are also 10 to 15 contacts. But we wanted to push the design space a little bit more. We wanted to say, well, we want to adapt how small this lesion is, because you actually want to be as small as possible to not affect other parts of the brain, but as large as possible to really get the epileptic focus. The amount of power that can go through these electrodes has to be considered. And then the diameter, I showed you 1.3 millimeters before for DBS. Here we were at 0.8. So when the engineers found this one out, a lot of the Aleva engineers were working on this device, as you can see. When they found that one out, they were like, that's impossible, like less than a millimeter, but they got there. They got there and they got 15 contacts on there. There's the impedance. So you want a certain impedance that allows you to record from the brain, but then you need an impedance that allows you to thermocoagulate or ablate the brain without moving this device. And so those are two opposing forces, the impedance recorded for recording and the impedance required for thermocoagulation. Then when we sat down and we looked at the clinical needs that we were exploring, we said the signal-to-noise ratio is, if we were to make an electrode, or the electrodes that exist today, the signal-to-noise ratio is way out of the design space. So there's no sweet spot that we could create. And Professor Dennison called these spikes and single units. It's another term for it. They couldn't record single units, and they were very interested in recording single units there. And another major clinical need was temperature measurement, which they want to follow the thermocoagulation while it's being performed. So you see that these are outside of the design space. So what do? So this is where you are allowed as an engineer sometimes to push technology. And so what I would like to argue is that this sweet spot that everybody was looking for was not doable with the technology that they had. And so if you look at these three and you introduce new technologies, you can push these into the design space and into the design sweet spot. That is what I would like to argue is what technology does. As Dr. Cray said, it allows us to create new products, and it allows us to meet unmet market needs that were not achievable before. So what I think we did here is push this, and the technology is called ASICs. So these are application-specific integrated circuits. And we designed at EPFL and at the Centre Suisse d'Électronique et Microtechnique this ASIC with a very strange profile, which is only 0.6 millimeters. Again, remember, we have to fit this into a 0.8 millimeter electrode. So the ASIC has to be smaller, but we have a whole bunch of toys we need on our ASIC, so it had to be very long. Okay, so we had to develop a way to cut these ASICs into these form factors. Here you can see the ASIC attached on the inside of the proximal end of the lead. In the actual device, it's going to be underneath these electrodes. And this was taken forward, and so Michel spoke about exits. This was taken forward by a company in France called Dixie Medical. So they purchased the entirety of Adept Neuro in 2022, and they're the ones who are going to take it the rest of the way forward, this ASIC-enabled technology. Okay, so in my last 30 seconds. Okay, in my last 30 seconds, I will show you what I think is next for neurotechnology. And so this is the question that we should ask ourselves: what will happen next? And so I'm going to show you a short video from Star Trek IV and The Voyage Home. And so for those of you that are not familiar with this movie, the astronauts are in the future, and I think they're perhaps 300 years in the future from our times. There's a problem in the future, and they need something that exists in our times today. So they come back in time to come get this thing. And along the way, some mishaps happen, and one of the astronauts gets very sick. And so you're going to see the doctor from Star Trek in our present times and what he thinks about medicine in our present times.
Who are you? Why aren't you masked? Who are these people? What the hell is that? What are you doing?
Tearing of the middle meningeal artery. How do you explain slow impulse, low respiratory rate, and coma?
Fundoscopic examination.
Fundoscopic examination is unrevealing in these cases.
A simple evacuation of the expanding epidural hematoma will relieve the pressure.
My God, man. Drilling holes in his head's not the answer. The artery must be repaired. Now put away your butcher knives and let me save this patient before it's too late. Dealing with medievalism here. Chemotherapy. Fundoscopic examinations. He's coming around, Jim. Name, rank.
Chekhov. Pavel. Rank. Admiral.
So he's not an admiral. Sorry, I broke the laser pointer. Sorry. He's not an admiral, so but he can make a joke about being an admiral. He's a lieutenant, and so that's a pretty good sign that he's recovered. So what I think is next for neurotechnology, and I'm going to show you the last design space for today. Patients want no implant. An implant will become a red zone. Okay. That's what we look at in the future. And so this is the design space for the future. Is this 300 years away or is it 10 years away? I don't know, but this will be the future. We will one day not require these implants. And the first steps towards this is a company that I have founded called Angel Wave Medical, which takes a modality called focused ultrasound that beams sound into small locations, small volumes in the brain, non-invasively. And you can do ablation, you can do modulation, and you can do blood-brain barrier opening with this technology. One of the best laboratories in the world is about 500 meters away from here in Physics for Medicine Paris, led by Jean-François Aubry, that have been working on this. And there are startups in Paris that are working on this for the blood-brain barrier opening. And I will rush through one more slide to show you how these systems look and how the patient can sit down in a chair with a physician targeting a part of the brain that they want to sonicate or stimulate comfortably without pain. And I think that this is one of the places that we're going eventually to wearable systems. So we started with MRI guiding. I think there will be neuronavigated next, and then eventually we might be able to take these home. And that is the conclusion of my talk. Again, thank you very much for the invitation. Merci beaucoup. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.